The US president's self-proclaimed Liberation Day is set to cast a long shadow over Australia's election campaign, with Donald Trump set to announce details of the sweeping tariffs tomorrow. A US trade report has specifically named Australia's pharmaceutical sector, biosecurity protections and media laws as impediments to its trade interests. Mr. Trump is adamant the tariffs will help safeguard the US economy.
We help everybody, and they don't help us. The term I like best probably is the liberation of America. It's the liberation of this country, because it's incredible. Look, we have $36 trillion in debt for a reason, and that accumulates over a long period of time. So I think what you're going to be seeing over the next couple of days will be very inspiring.
And back home, the federal government is bracing for that announcement. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetz joins us now from Canberra. Stephen, what can we expect to see in this announcement from Donald Trump, and what sectors are we expecting might be hit?
Well, Dan, the brutal reality is we simply do not know. At this stage, there is still enormous uncertainty about what Donald Trump may or may not announce tomorrow, particularly when it comes to Australia. There have been, honestly, really conflicting signals from the White House over the last couple of weeks. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, Donald Trump seemed to be suggesting it would only be a fairly small number of countries, the so-called Dirty 15, that might be targeted. That gave some hope to Australian officials that perhaps we wouldn't be caught up in this round. But more recently, the language, as you can hear there, has broadened out again. And what the president seems to be preparing all of his trading partners for is pretty broad-based, sweeping reciprocal tariffs, as he puts it, namely taking aim not just at nations that have a trade surplus with America, but also nations that actually, like Australia, run a deficit, and targeting many barriers to American trade as they see it. So increasingly that looks like it may well include things like the non-trade barriers that Australia has put up to American goods, things like our customs regime, or potentially even the goods and services tax. So look, at the moment there is honestly just an awful lot of uncertainty. Don Farrell, the Trade Minister, has been briefing industry groups on this. He did so last night. He was warning them that potentially you might be looking up to tariffs, anything up to potentially 20%, perhaps across the board. But it's also possible that the tariffs won't apply across the board and that specific sectors might just be targeted. It's also possible that Australia may get off lightly. I think the mood here in Canberra has turned more pessimistic recently. I think over the last sort of 24 or 48 hours, there seems to be a settling view here that it's not going to be good news for Australia tomorrow. But honestly, this is all still very speculative. The reality is, until we get firm information from the President and from the White House, we simply do not know what the full impact will be on Australia and exactly how that will reverberate through global markets.
Oh, and Stephen, this is all happening in the frame of the federal election, which is underway. What's been the response from political leaders here?
Look, political leaders are obviously very preoccupied with this. The Prime Minister and the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, both know that this will define at least the next few days of the campaign, and possibly, depending on the scale of what's unveiled, both for Australia and globally, possibly something that will reverberate throughout the rest of the campaign. So, unsurprisingly, both leaders have been sharpening their lines on this. Now, we heard from Peter Dutton this morning a pretty clear line of attack, focusing again on what he describes as Anthony Albanese's weakness. His suggestion now is that Anthony Albanese hasn't been strong enough to stand up to Donald Trump. Other frontbenchers have accused the Prime Minister of not throwing enough energy into what he's doing here to try and secure an exemption. Let's take a listen to Peter Dutton speaking on this earlier today.
My job is to stand up for Australians, and I have the strength and the experience to be able to do that. The Prime Minister is seen as a weak leader here in Australia. He's seen as a weak leader by our international partners as well. That's just the reality of it. That's the way he conducts himself. So I will make decisions that are in our country's best interests in relation to tariffs or other matters.
Now, the Prime Minister has really scoffed at that. He's accused Peter Dutton of engaging in overheated rhetoric and suggesting that his only approach in diplomacy is to employ bombastic and aggressive rhetoric, saying that doesn't always work. He's also played down the full impact of these tariffs, saying that yes, they might be serious, yes, they will potentially have a big impact, but arguing that they need to be put in perspective, pointing out that all of Australia's exports to America only amount to about 5% in total of the value. In other words, Australia's economy is not going to be cratered or shattered by this. It's going to be resilient enough to withstand it. The real fear, I think, for Australia is less perhaps what comes tomorrow, but what impact those global tariffs have on global markets and on global trading systems. If it does spark an all-out global trade war, then Australia is very, very vulnerable, particularly because we're such a trade-exposed economy. In any case, let's take a listen to Anthony Albanese responding here to Peter Dutton's critique.
I stood up for Australia when they put on aluminium and steel tariffs. I continue to stand up for Australia and have said very clearly that we won't compromise and negotiate on our PBS, on our biosecurity, on our media bargaining code. I'll stand up for Australia. Peter Dutton will always dial things up to 11. He thinks this is a contest of who can say the most aggro things.
So now, Dan, all eyes on Washington. We're expecting an announcement in the Rose Garden at some point early tomorrow morning, Australia time, and Anthony Albanese, Peter Dutton and pretty much everyone in Canberra will have their eyes fixed on the screens for that.